kind words. As Stephanie was talking and she was mentioning community, in the month of November, my family, we start a just kind of thankfulness wreath. And every one of us will say what we're thankful for each day, all the way through Thanksgiving. And so my oldest, Titus, who's a senior, he said tonight, it's providential, he said, for easy assimilation into Christian heritage.
Awesome.
And I was like, wow, that was really, it was really, really neat to hear him say that and express that thankfulness. And we've only been here a short time, and so it was, it warmed my heart as a father. Success. We have all had a vision of what success looks like. Consider the Looney Tunes character Wile E. Coyote. He firmly believes that success culminates with the destruction of Roadrunner. So how does he spend his days? Well, you know the story. In scene after scene, he concocts a foolproof plan that will lead to the Roadrunner's demise. You can picture it now. He sits on a mountain pass and has 40 million tons of dynamite waiting for Roadrunner below at the end of a blind curve. There's no way Roadrunner can avoid this as he ascends the mountain pass. Coyote peers through his binoculars and he sees Roadrunner begin his climb and believes in his heart of hearts that this time he is going to prevail. Fast forward to the next scene, and Coyote believes the explosion should have already occurred and checks to see the whereabouts of Roadrunner. And all of a sudden, he hears that dreaded beep beep in his ear. How could this happen? He quickly devises Plan B, but slips off the mountain and lands firmly on the store of dynamite that was meant for Roadrunner. And it detonates, and we all laugh. Coyote's plans, the plans he so meticulously crafted, failed him time and again as he was outsmarted by the Roadrunner. When writer Chuck Jones was dreaming up the Coyote character in the late 1940s, he received some inspiration for his character from Mark Twain. Twain wrote a semi-autobiographical work called Roughing It, published in 1872. In it, he describes actual coyotes as living, breathing allegories of want. They are always hungry. Twain says more about coyotes than just this, but Jones used this description to inform his creation of the coyote character. Over the years, people have found Wile E. Coyote admirable because he never gives up. He is always watching and pursuing the Roadrunner. He is persistent because his hunger always leads him, and it never dies. I believe Coyote's attempts at success are similar to what we see with American high school students today. Our culture willingly shares a vision of success with them, and starting sometime in middle school, students begin to form a perceived vision of what success in school and in the world looks like. And like Coyote, they begin to hunger after it. This perceived vision of success does two things. First, it forms their understanding of what school is for. And second, it shapes their view of who they are as human beings. So what cultural view of success is trickling down to our logic and rhetoric school students? To help us understand this, here are 8 different students sharing their view of collegiate success. And these are not our graduates. These are random 8 students. First, student success to me means graduating from the academic program you want to graduate from with the GPA you are proud of, also finding a job in your field after graduating. 2, freely travel the world until satisfied. 3, striving to be better than my peers. 4, it means going into the workforce with a concept of leadership and teamwork. 5, and this is probably the best one, marrying a plastic surgeon and/or senator. 6, to cultivate the mindset to be able to live the life that you want to live. 7, success to me is a good job, my own house, and a vehicle. Just one. And finally, get into school, do well, graduate, and most of all, get a good job. If you do not get a good job, you have really done nothing. Did you hear several things that were repeated? A good job. We all want to do something meaningful. Traveling the world. Seeing foreign lands is exciting. A home. We love a familiar space. A car. We need transportation. And possessing skills. We like to do things well. This is the cultural vision of collegial success. And I've heard middle school and high school students repeat these same things for years. And all of these things are good things. I think one word summarizes all of these answers: happiness. Like Coyote, we are hungry, and our culture tells us we should pursue these things. Again, there is nothing wrong with these things, except when they become divorced from reality. But this leads me to consider a second question. Why does our culture put forth this view of success? What's at the root of it? Let me see if I can first demonstrate what is behind this view of success. I'm going to use my handy bag of tricks over here. So first, I've got a cereal bowl. I'm going to pour some cereal. In goes the cereal, in goes the milk, and it's time to eat. We know what the problem is. You cannot eat cereal with a hammer. Instead, you need a spoon. Okay, second, I have a piece of wood, and I need to screw this screw in here. And so I'm going to start and try to screw the screw in here. And I could probably, well, I might could do it, but it works really, really well if you have a drill and you can get the drill in there, and it works because we're using this drill according to its purpose. And lastly, have a piece of paper, and you can see I'm going to try to cut it down here, and I'm going to use,
That's great.
well, and you can see that if I do that, then all of a sudden it doesn't really work very well. And so instead, if I use this, I can cut pretty straight, but you get the idea. The purpose of this demonstration is really to show that to be successful, you have to understand the purpose for which things are made. A hammer will not be a successful hammer unless it's treated like a hammer. There's a purpose statement, there is a purpose statement and an understanding of who we are as human beings lurking in the background of our cultural view of success. And the 8 students captured it in what they were saying. Much of their desires revolved around jobs, money, and having things. And none of these things in and of themselves are the problem. But if we make them ultimate and believe this is all we are, then humans are nothing more than workers and consumers. We go to college to get a job, and that is the only reason we go to college. We procure a good job because we want to buy things that make us happy. Just like Twain's understanding of coyotes as a living allegory of want, so is this view of humanity. This is the root of our problem. Our culture tells us a biblical view of mankind is wrong, and we believe it. But we are more than workers, and we're more than consumers. Wanting is not wrong, but if it is divorced from the God who made us and what he made us to be, then it becomes a problem. We must ask ourselves the question, as human beings, who are we fundamentally? Well, you guys know the answer. We are image bearers. The Bible clearly tells us that. Have you ever heard someone say, you are the spitting image of your daddy? Of course you have. And we say this because we can see the distinctive characteristics that make the child a physical representation of their dad. Their eyes, the color of their hair, their facial expressions, even the way they talk, all tell the story of their patrimony. We look like our parents. And since this is true, in what ways do we look like God? Since God is a king, he gave us dominion over the earth in his stead. In Genesis 1, he said to Adam and Eve, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it." As one Old Testament scholar has said, just as powerful earthly kings, to indicate their claim of dominion, erect an image of themselves in the provinces of their empire where they do not personally appear, so man is placed upon earth in God's image as God's sovereign emblem. When Adam and Eve looked at each other, they would know that they were created, and they would know that by virtue of their creation, they were made for a purpose to image God to the world. And they would image God to the world through their wise stewardship and rule. Second, since God is a creator, he has given us creative capacities to beautify and adorn his world. Our creativity mimics God's artistic genius. We are therefore sub-creators and long to see, produce, and fashion beautiful things. Beauty comes from God, and we seek to imitate him in the beautiful things that we make. And since God dwells in a temple, Isaiah 6:1, he has made us priests to spread his goodness and presence in the world. Consider Exodus 19:5-6. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. The New Testament echoes our priesthood in 1 Peter 2:9. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. So we resemble our heavenly daddy in that he has made us kingly, artistic, and priestly. And since we are created, we receive our value and our worth from him alone. Therefore, there is only one thing that makes us happy: living in harmony with God. St. Augustine said, "You have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until we find our rest in you." Humans flourish when we operate according to the way God has made us. We suffer when we believe we exist for something else. So we are image bearers who receive our identity and satisfaction from only one source. This is the starting place that puts education and everything else in its proper perspective. For humans to flourish, we need an education that takes seriously who we are as people. If we are embodied souls that will last forever, then education at its heart must be about transformation. Transformation of the human person. John Ruskin, a 19th century Christian Renaissance man of sorts, graduate of Oxford, he wrote on philosophy, political economy, art, literature, myth, botany, geology, architecture, and education. He said this about education: the entire object of true education is to make people not merely do the right things, but enjoy the right things. Not merely industrious, but to love industry. Not merely learned, but to love knowledge. Not merely pure, but to love purity. Not merely just, but to hunger and thirst after justice. You can hear the transformation language in this quote. We are to enjoy the right things. We are to love knowledge and purity. And we're to hunger and thirst after justice. In other words, true education is about making us better versions of ourselves in all facets of our lives. It has a more grandiose vision of who we are as image bearers. The cultural vision of success handed down to our kids is too small, but is included in what true education entails. In the cultural vision of success, we are just workers and consumers. As Christians, we acknowledge work as good and understand that it's biblical to enjoy its fruits. But working and consuming are not ultimate, but only part of the human experience. The cultural vision of success embraces a portion of who we are as humans, but fails to understand the full implications of our image-bearing status. Ruskin's vision of education embraces humanity as embodied souls who must be formed in a certain way to be fully human and flourish in the world that God has made. What ultimately must be formed in us? The first and the greatest commandment Christ gives to his people is to love God with everything and our neighbors as ourselves. Jesus tells us what must be formed in us. It is our love, because we are fundamentally lovers. Here's an illustration that reminds me time and again of who we are. St. Augustine said this. It's going to sound a little bit odd in the beginning, but just bear with me. My weight is my love. Wherever I am carried, my love is carrying me. What does he mean? The ancients saw love as a gravitational force. Just as the moon is kept encircling the earth because it's pulled by the earth's gravitational forces, so our loves cause us to orbit the objects of our affection. Think about when someone falls in love with another person. How do they behave? They think about this person. They watch this person, and they move with this person. Their love causes them to orbit this person in thought, word, and deed. Think about the other things that we love. Sports, cars, food, kids, travel, our job. Our loves will animate our thoughts, words, and actions. So everybody's going to know that we love Texas A&M football, or we love whatever. It's going to come out of us. If this is true about us, and it is, then it is imperative that any education must teach us to love the right things, because we are fundamentally disordered and selfish. Sometimes we believe lies, so we must learn what is true. Sometimes we enjoy things that are bad, so we must learn what is good. And sometimes we love ugly things, so we must learn about what is beautiful. Education at its core is about transformation. The transformation of our loves where we become more human and learn how to wisely inhabit God's world. And education in what to love is the primary fruit of classical education. And this is so much bigger than the limiting cultural vision of success. We are not just workers and consumers, but so much more. We are husbands and fathers, wives and mothers, sons and daughters, leaders and communicators, followers and riders, planners and preparers, servers and shapers, and hopers and dreamers. How does a classical Christian education equip real people for living in the real world? What is the fruit that we want our students to bear at Christian Heritage? It starts and ends with 3 questions. What do I want my students to know? What intellectual habits and skills do I want my students to possess? And what do I want my students to become? As teachers and administrators, these 3 questions inform everything we do at Christian Heritage, because we know that teaching is about image-bearing students and their growth. Let's take a look at each of these 3 questions in turn. First, what do we want our students to know? As teachers, we understand the classroom is a sacred space because we are imparting a cultural literacy to our students, a literacy of the past that promotes wise living in the present. How do we do this? First, it means that we create an environment that is conducive to learning. Second, we have specific objectives in mind for each class period, which make our lessons memorable and retainable. Students are the focus of our objectives because understanding God and God's world through the subjects we teach is our goal. knowledge of the world, situates our students in time and space, and helps them intelligently inhabit and flourish in God's world. Our classes are not about giving information. You may have asked a buddy this question when you were in school. What information was on the test? This view of the world reveals information as disposable, only useful for a certain time and space. Knowledge, on the other hand, not only arms students with an understanding of the past, but gives them a repository to pull from for the rest of their lives. Over the past 20 years of teaching, students have said something in class that surprises other students. And then they ask the question, how do you know that? And then the student would go on and articulate how they learned that. Knowing changes us. It grounds us, causes us to wonder, helps us understand our limits, and humbles us. Christopher Beha, when he dropped out of Princeton and came back home to live with his parents, he was suffering physically from Lyme disease and mentally with the death of his grandmother. He remembered hearing stories of his grandmother reading the Harvard classics to educate herself during the Great Depression of all times. Inspired by her example, he decided to read these classics at a very difficult time in his life. When someone asked him what he learned after reading the 54-volume set, he said, "It taught me how to be in this world." I think what he's trying to say is that it taught him how to live as a human being. Christopher Beha was not learning information, but gaining a cultural literacy that taught him how to live. Christopher Beha is now the editor of Harper's Magazine. Many of the very same books Christopher Beha read are what our students read at Christian Heritage. This knowledge grounds our students and gives them a certain gravitas. It gives them a substantial soul, not a flimsy soul that naively follows the current ideas of our time. Our graduates look different than other schools because the course of study and teaching they receive are about equipping image bearers with knowledge. And when they come back to visit us, they tell us how different they look from others because of what they know and their ability to continue learning, despite the difficulty of the subject. More than this, their professors recognize the difference as well. When I first started teaching here, I heard a story of one of our students who was, one of our graduates who was sitting in a college, sitting at college, about 300 seat auditorium, and the professor was lecturing. And over the course of the lecture, the professor began moving closer and closer to our student because they were the only one who was talking and interacting with the professor. And so over time, what happened was the 299 students were just eavesdropping on the conversation between the professor and our graduate. And even more recently, Mrs. Brummett's daughter, Ainsley Brummett, who would openly admit that she at times struggled here and even knew that she was not the smartest person at Christian Heritage, has now gone to Texas Tech and is flourishing and has experienced a lot of success. And she is the one who is being commended by the Dean of the English Department for how well she is writing and articulating arguments. She's not afraid to speak up in class. This is real life, and this is what our students get to continue doing the rest of their life. It's not just for a job, it is for living in the real world. A classical, let me make sure I'm going back to my right spot here. So the first question, our first question deals with knowledge. What do we want our students to know? The second question deals with intellectual habits and skills. Students not only need to know things, but they must have the stamina to learn things and then be able to demonstrate what they know using a variety of skills. What intellectual habits do we want them to possess? Two of the most important are a love of learning and a habit of attentiveness. Let me see if I can demonstrate their importance. Have you ever been around someone who is eager to learn? Maybe you have observed this person in a meeting, or maybe you had to train this person for your job. Every day in my senior AP English class, I'm looking at 9 eager learners. They look at me in the face, they talk back to me, and we have, in a good way, talk back to me, and we have a conversation, and it's a beautiful interaction. And then guess what happens? The bell rings, and we keep talking, and then a couple will straggle out, and then the bell has still rung, and people are still talking to me. It's because they are eager learners, and they're eating up what they are learning here at Christian Heritage. A classical education opens up the wonder of God's world in all subjects, allowing students to see the beauty of God's world, the interconnectedness of the subjects, and teaches students in age-appropriate ways that allow them to take in and enjoy the things that they're learning. The second intellectual habit we want to cultivate in our students is the habit of attention. You know, it's hard to accomplish anything when you're distracted. And I'm sure you've given your kids a task to complete, and they weren't exactly listening to you when you were giving them that task, and then that task remained undone. We as teachers know it's easy to get distracted. I have to close my door just so I can begin teaching, or else I get too distracted. But we subtly and gently bring our students back when they appear unfocused. Just as we adults can accomplish much when we give our attention to a task, so student production increases as well. A philosopher once said something like this: a true philosopher can focus on an object for an entire minute without distraction. I heard this about 30 years ago, and at the time I thought it was a little ridiculous. But now I'm more inclined to believe it, because I cannot think about something for a minute without feeling the tug of distraction. A habit of attentiveness causes our students to look different from others, because they are the ones who have been habituated to listen when the rest of the world is distracted. The attention of our students gives them a taste of success because they reap the reward of their attention: knowledge, wisdom, and additional skills. If a love of learning and the habit of attentiveness are the intellectual habits we cultivate in our students, what skills do we seek to develop in our students? First, in our teaching, we ask a lot of questions. These questions are not just seeking facts, but larger connections and relationships across subjects and between ideas. I teach 9th and 12th grade literature, as I said, so I'm asking questions of my students that go well beyond the plot of the book. How is so-and-so like so-and-so? How are they different? Evaluate their actions in light of biblical revelation. Is so-and-so just? Do the characters change over the course of the novel? If so, justify your answer. How did their ideas impact their culture? These questions allow our students to make connections, ask questions, draw distinctions, analyze, and synthesize information. In a word, it is honing their critical thinking skills and deepening their understanding of the world. If you were a fly on the wall during a graded discussion in my senior AP English class, you would watch this unfold. A graded discussion happens as we reach the end of a novel and is one of the culminating events. It is entirely led and facilitated by the students about the larger questions of the novel. It occurs over one class period, but one period is never enough because the students have so much to say. It is usually during this time that their discussion leads me to make new connections that I've never made as a result of their discussion. It is a beautiful thing to watch seniors talk about a novel for 45 minutes without a lull in the conversation. All of us know how important it is to communicate well. The design of a classical Christian education is to teach this skill to our students, both in writing and in speaking. Throughout our curriculum, students have the opportunity to formulate arguments and express them either formally or informally, either orally or in writing. As students proceed through logic school, They are naturally argumentative, so we teach them how to recognize and construct arguments. In rhetoric school, we teach them how to present these arguments eloquently and winsomely. This argumentation and communication culminates in the senior thesis presentation, where students develop and defend an argument before a panel of judges. This presentation does a variety of things in and to our students, but one thing it does is it gives them confidence. As they enter college, they are the ones assisting their peers in putting together their presentations because it's something they have done so many times before. Our students' ability to communicate gives them a functional literacy that they will use the rest of their lives. Finally, a classical education provides an education in moral literacy. We train our students to grow in virtue as they view the world from God's perspective, prudence, as they learn to give others what they owe them as fellow image bearers, justice, as they watch what they themselves love and pursue, temperance, and as they stand up for all that is good, true, and beautiful in God's world, fortitude. Each day in our curriculum and in our teaching, they encounter these things and learn to emulate them. The end result is that they understand how to live wisely in God's world as they serve God and their fellow man. A classical Christian education is the best education for image bearers because it takes into account who they are as image bearers. It gives them knowledge, teaches them how to learn, fosters a love of learning, develops intellectual habits and skills, and holds before them a life of virtue. Our graduates know more, can do more, and sound different from their peers. This education allows them to thrive in the real world and in any situation that God will put them in. Parents, you are making the wisest investment you could ever make because you are investing in the transformation, flourishing, and growth of your children as made in the image of God. Your children will bear fruit as a result of this education, and it will make an impact for God's kingdom and eternity. What else could we ask for?